Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall for this evening's Oregon Symphony Concert and to our concert conversations here. I'm John Pittman, the music director at Portland's listener-supported, recently fund-driven All Classical FM. Thank you very much for coming this evening. Do we have some members here tonight, some All Classical members? Good, good. Thank you for coming.
Not a majority, though.
No. We'll try to increase those numbers for next time. I'm here with our guest conductor for this evening, Rosan Milanov, who is originally from Bulgaria, and but now living in the States, correct?
For many years already,
Yeah.
21 years in the States as of last month, September 1st.
Yeah. And
Thank you.
You and I were speaking backstage. You do a little bit of radio work yourself.
Yes, I do host our broadcasts for one of my orchestras located on the East Coast. The orchestra is called Symphony in C, and it's one of the premier training orchestras in the country. We have exclusively young people in their 20s. They come and play with us for about 5-6 years, and then they move on. As a matter of fact, I think a couple of years ago, one of your viola players, Mara Gierman, was formerly a principal player of that orchestra.
Oh, great.
I know now she moved a little bit north to Seattle.
Yep. Yeah, we gain them and we lose them occasionally. And you're involved with, or have been involved with a number of youth orchestra situations. Symphony in C, you mentioned. You went on a tour with the Australia Youth Orchestra at one point.
Yes, as a conductor, as a younger conductor starting my career, you have several paths. One of them is to have a mentor that will help you all the way through the career. The other way is to start as an assistant conductor of a major orchestra, and the third path is generally starting as a youth orchestra conductor. So I took the third path right after finishing school, and my first job was in Chicago, being music director of the Chicago Youth Symphony at the time. And all over these years, for me, education is very important, and I feel that classical music is one of the areas that still requires one-on-one attention if you want to pass on this incredible tradition that we inherit. Because what's notated on the page is just a very small amount of information. The majority you learn from your teachers, you learn from attending live concerts such as this, and it's passed on by someone that is willing to go that extra mile and work with you. So I believe very strongly in that, and all my life I've been very interested in passing on what I have already learned from my teachers and what I've learned from the experiences that I had on the podium. Mm-hmm. And of course you could translate this not only into teaching professional musicians, but you could also inspire people to appreciate classical music and music in general as such. So you don't have to play an instrument in order to be introduced to music. It's just music is for everybody, and sometimes that love for it is very important to be made contagious, so people could really, once they get infected by it, they could never get cured again. And we'll have this beautiful hole full for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, yeah.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah, it takes a passionate person with the ability to express the importance of this music and how important it is to you, to others, to share that with the next generation. Portland has a pretty strong youth orchestra component to it too. There's the Portland Youth Philharmonic, which is
I know
one of
all
the
about
country's
it because
oldest.
one of my former colleagues is in charge now of the orchestra, and I got a nice letter before arriving here, so I know all about it. And I hope that I could see them in action sometime in the beginning of next week when I have a morning off here in Portland.
Wonderful, wonderful. You're conducting tonight, and then we have another concert on Monday night. The program has as its big centerpiece the it'll be on the second half, the Brahms Piano Concerto No. 1 in D minor. And I'm sure everyone in the room knows by now that the original scheduled pianist had to cancel due to an ear infection. Yefim Bronfman had to cancel. These things happen. But we have Natasha Peremsky, a young woman who has already performed at the Oregon Symphony last season with the Prokofiev Concerto No. 1, which is 15 minutes of tautly constructed pyrotechnics for the keyboard. Tonight is very different. It's that 15 minutes is barely a third of tonight's duration with the Brahms.
Brahms's piece is almost 50 minutes long, so slight difference there. And of course, it's one of the most important works in the repertoire. And Natasha, she has been so gracious during the rehearsals and also learning. I should not say learning because she has played the piece before, but making sure that everything comes back to her mind on a very short notice, literally 48 hours before the first rehearsal yesterday. So we are extremely grateful that we still can do this piece without having to change necessarily the repertoire tonight. And as you said, this is a piece which Brahms wrote only 2 piano concerti, and the first one he wrote when he was a person in his 20s, early 20s. And what is perhaps the most striking thing about it is that at the time he was going through one of the more bigger, I should say, personal tragedies, because as a young composer at the time, he was discovered by one of the greatest composers of his time, Robert Schumann. And Schumann listened to some of his music, and he thought that he was one of the most talented people that could continue the great German tradition of composers such as Beethoven. And of course, he fulfilled that enormous expectation, but that friendship with Schumann lasted unfortunately only 3 years. And 1 year into their friendship, Schumann, who was very mentally unstable at the time, tried to commit suicide by jumping into the Rhine River, and he was rescued but put for the other 2 years of his life in asylum. And his wife, also a very beautiful, talented pianist and a composer on her own, was not allowed to see him at all at the asylum until the rest of his life. So Brahms was the person that was literally serving as the connection, as the communication between these two very important people, and people that really in the realm of music have this idiomatic relationship of a pianist married a composer, and it's sort of the epitome of romantic love that we see it, at least in classical music. And Schumann, of course, passed away, and Brahms was, nobody knows what exactly was going on there between him and the widow of Schumann at the time, but she turned out to be his biggest muse for the rest of his life. And later on, when they were not living in the same city, he asked her to send him all the correspondence that they had exchanged during the year, and he just burned them into his stove. So nobody really knows what is going there, and people speculate. They say that they had a consummated relationship of some sort. Some people say that it was purely platonic. But one thing that we know, and that the second movement of the concerto that you're going to hear tonight was dedicated to her. And it was done in a very, how should I say, discreet way, because he wrote a line in Latin that comes from the Mass, the Catholic Mass, which is Benedictus qui venis, which means how do you say in English? Benedicted, what is it? Blessed,
like
blessed, exactly,
yeah.
Blessed. Blessed is the one that comes forth in the name of God. And when you listen to this music, you could not help it but just hear this incredible tenderness and yearning for closeness, and something very, very special, which I hope is going to come across tonight. The other thing about this piece is that it's so shocking. The very beginning, for a lot of the audiences, they didn't really expect to hear a piano concerto, which was more or less considered at the time as an entertainment component on the program of a symphony concert goers. It was a piece that was supposed to display the virtuosity of the pianist, to give an opportunity for a big cadenza, very flashy, very optimistic. The piece normally would not go too deep into human tragedy or drama, And from the very first moment, from the very first 10 seconds of the piece, we are sent into a place that no other concerto has ever been. And that darkness, that conflict which sort of radiates from the music, of course, is related to the events that he was going through in his life, the death of his benefactor, and also his personal tragedies of a person in his 20s that is trying to find his way in life.
Yeah. And adding another layer of poignancy to the story is that Brahms himself had a rather not the greatest upbringing, not the greatest childhood, and he had already, some of us have heard of how he was in Hamburg and had to play, you know, kind of like the equivalent of saloon pianos in the dives, the sailors' dives in Hamburg, so to make his way. And so then he comes to the Schumanns and they welcome him with open arms, and that was a really different experience for him.
It was a different experience, and you know, this is not the Brahms that we remember from that famous picture. You know, the big man with the beard and sort of very imposing. This was the Brahms of his 20s, who was very, very skinny with beautiful hair, almost girl-like looking. So we have to keep in mind that when we listen to this piece, that this was written by a person in their early 20s.
Yeah. Rossen, the Piano Concerto Number 1, I see as kind of a correlation with the experience that he had in writing his Symphony Number 1. And it's complicated, and we could go in a few layers, but the common thread between the two was that struggle to get it in its satisfactory form. And one story that I read that was really interesting, I thought, is that the Piano Concerto actually started out as a sonata for 2 pianos, and then Schumann, who already was ill, said, "Why don't you turn it into a symphony?" But he wasn't happy with that. And then apparently in a letter or in person, he told Clara that he had a dream that he was playing his symphony as a concerto, and he was very happy with that result. And so apparently he went on from there. Maybe that's anecdotal, but that's
this is pretty much the case.
Yeah.
But let's not forget that Brahms, before becoming a great composer, he was a fantastic pianist. And he was a pianist with a very athletic style. He was not a pianist that normally we will associate with playing very fast and brilliant passage works. He was a pianist that would favor very heavy chords with a lot of octaves, a lot of heft in the piano, and obviously the music that he had in mind for that project, whatever it was, a sonata for 2 pianos, a symphony, or ultimately a piano concerto, portrays that idea of piano sound that becomes a signature language for him for many years, pretty much until the end of his life, when he goes again to something much more simpler and aquarelle-like, rather than compared to this one, very, very heavy, almost Baroque-like oil painting.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned, well, there's a heaviness to the texture of the piece at times. That slow movement, it stands so in relief of the first and third movements, especially coming after that majestic first movement. And then the third movement is maybe a little closer to the idea of something flashy, because it's that fast rondo finale.
It is. It's a rondo finale, more or less written in Hungarian style, and that word Hungarian is going to come quite a lot for the rest of the program tonight.
Yeah.
The other 2 pieces that we'll have on the menu for you. And essentially, before composing the piano concerto, Brahms was very involved with a Hungarian violinist named Reményi, who was a concert violinist and who toured Europe at the time, playing mostly Hungarian music, a lot of this gypsy violin music that I'm sure you must have heard recently, because there was a big group in Hungary that became quite popular maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the Lakatos brothers, that will play something similar. This was a style that he was introduced by this violinist, and this is how he met his other very influential friend, Joseph Joachim, to whom he dedicated his other great concerto, the violin concerto, and also the double concerto. So Brahms was not foreign to influences of that particular style of music, and the fact that he uses it literally on the next year after he toured with the Hungarian violinist is something that keeps reappearing in a lot of his very important pieces in the future. You have the famous piano quartet, Opus 25, the one in G minor that has this rondo alla ungherese. Of course, he writes this set of Hungarian dances that we all know and love, and they're very popular. Then little bits and pieces of Hungarian magic appear in some of the other important pieces as well. So this is in a way, a favorite world for him to escape when he wants to become a little lighter. So maybe Hungary was the country where he could feel a little bit free and not so constrained by the tradition of the German tradition at the time.
Right. Well, and Vienna has long been seen as a kind of a way station, kind of a crossing roads between East and West, and there was a lot of cultural crossing through there. Now, you mentioned the Hungarian dances, and you have Zoltán Kodály tonight, the 20th century Hungarian composer who did a lot of research into his own country's folk music. And I can recall reading or hearing that Bartók and Kodály were kind of saying that Brahms and Liszt's Hungarian dances weren't really quite the true Hungarian dances. Could you shed a little bit of light on that discrepancy?
Yes, of course. We need to look at that in a bigger historical context, because Europe, I'm sure you're very well aware of it, but it's a continent which comprises of very little states, and each one of them claims to be very unique and very independent, at least culturally. So you go to Austrian-Hungarian Empire at the moment, and as you could tell by the name of the empire, it obviously consists of Austria-Hungary. But in addition to that, there were a lot of Balkan countries, particularly on the western side of the Balkan Peninsula, that were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So you're going to get Croatians, you're going to get some Slovenian people, you're going to get some Slovaks, you're going to get probably some Czech people as well. And each one of them brought their own folklore, their own language, their own dances, if you even wish. And this was something, of course, which is very important. But in the 19th century, it was taken somewhat from a point of view of being something exotic, not necessarily musicologically correct. And when Bartók and Kodály appeared at the beginning of the 20th century, there is this other trend in a lot of these countries that have already gained their independence, that we need to go deep down and try to find out what is the logic behind the folklore. How do people create folklore? How does this incredible wealth of knowledge gets distilled through the layers of the national psyche? And this is where they went to places that were perhaps very isolated historically, and where they notated everything so it would be preserved. And Bartók and Kodály, of course, were the biggest musicologists from that particular trend in the entire Eastern Europe. And luckily for us, for me as a Bulgarian born, their reach also extended all the way to Transylvania, to Romania, and to Bulgaria, and they notated a lot of that folklore, which otherwise would have been completely lost. And they also used it in their compositions, because they thought that it was very important to have that national identity. And in America, they did it differently. They did it through using a lot of the American genres, such as jazz, of course, which was preceded by ragtime and a lot of spirituals. But in Europe, and particularly in Hungary, they based everything on that national folklore. In my country as well, in Russia as well, and at the end of the 19th century, you could recognize a Russian piece because of that folklore identity, which is very close, at least, to the people to which it was written for.
Kodály's Dances of Galanta, that's a reference to an actual town that Kodály lived in for some years in his childhood. So he got the sound of these gypsy musicians who had been there since the 18th century at least the 18th century. And he wanted to give some sense of the kind of music that was being performed there. I understand that in the 18th century, that was kind of the golden age for these gypsy musicians. And by the time of Kodai, he knew that that culture was somewhat in decline. So maybe there's a little bit of preservation involved by Kodai.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Preservation and passing on the tradition, because Kodai is also, I think in this country, he's even more famous as an educator than as a composer. And he didn't write that many pieces that make it to the concert podium. But he was very, very much about that very broad music education that was sort of a utopian ideal in Europe at the time, in the 20s and 30s, between the two wars. And this is absolutely true. There was a book of collection of musical examples, which was published in Vienna in the early 19th century, which was called Music from Galanta. And he used some of these notated examples to sort of bring back that style, the style of those gypsy bands that, in fact, throughout the 19th century, they were using as army military recruitment techniques. So they will send to your village a band of gypsy musicians, and they will start playing this music. They will be accompanied by dancers and acrobats, and it will be very, very impressive, and it will hopefully encourage people to enlist in the army. So that's why it has this Hungarized German word, Verbunkos. And when you visit Budapest nowadays, I mean, what you are hearing in the restaurants there, and it's literally a tourist version of that same style, which, of course, Kodai uses here in this selection of dances, dances of Galanta that we're going to be playing for you tonight.
Yeah, and we're at about 6 minutes, so I want to say a word or two about the Haydn, because there's even a little Hungarian flavor in there, I think, maybe.
Oh,
maybe just a touch here and there.
He worked for a Hungarian count, Count Esterházy.
Yeah. That symphony is an unusual one by this man who wrote 104 or more symphonies. In fact, he kind of helped set the standard or the format for the symphony. But this is so different, and partly because the Symphony Number 60 was not just written out as a symphony. It began life as an overture and incidental music to a play. And that play was called Il Distratto, or the absent-minded man, the distracted man. I think there's a German name that the Germans and Austrians would have known it by. But it gives the whole symphony a very different kind of character. It's almost like listening to film music, or, in the sense that there's little episodes, and you'll be going along with a little melody, and all of a sudden in come these military trumpet fanfares, and it all works great. But I kind of think that in this day and age, maybe we would call it the short attention span symphony, because you just start to get used to one thing, and and then something else comes in and grab your attention.
Haydn was, in addition of being, of course, one of the greatest composers and innovators, and just a person that without his music, our experience here at the concert would probably have been very, very different, because he really was, as they say, using a cliche, of course, the father of the symphony. But in this case, the way I view it, of course, this is an incidental music, but when he transformed it into a symphony, what it feels like is that you have your 4 movements of traditional symphony, which has this nice, impressive finale. But then what you have after that, you have these 2 other movements that are sort of attached as, how should I say, a nice 2 courses of dessert at the end of the meal. Like one which is very beautiful, almost like an Italian aria. It reminds me of Casta Diva. I always told it to the orchestra, this sounds exactly like Casta Diva, let's play it like that. The famous aria by Bellini from his opera Norma. And then, in addition to that, that theatrical aspect, as you mentioned already, of course it's infiltrated somehow in the music, but once you get to the very end, there is something even more special that I'm not going to tell you what it is, because you're not going to be entertained. But he really brings an extra musical element to that dinner, to that symphony.
Yeah.
And so expect something quite unconventional. And this is about Haydn, that he always, with all these 104 symphonies discovered that he wrote, there is always something special about each one of them. So it takes a great genius to reinvent himself in such a way that each symphony will have something fresh and unique about it. And this one, of course, has a full bag of it.
Yeah, yeah.
More so than anything else that he wrote. So you're in for a treat. It's very funny. It's a comedy, and I hope that you'll be entertained.
It's a great way to start the concert. And by the way, he made the Food Music Association. Did you know that this guy does a cooking show too? In Bulgaria, right? You host a cooking show.
It's a cooking show and classical music, so I tie things up.
Yeah, that's great. This is conductor Rossen Milanov. Let's welcome him again to Portland, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm John Pittman.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.